This one might just touch your heart in a way you didn't expect. It was a quiet evening at Central Grace Hospital in Chicago. The kind of night where fluorescent lights hummed softly and the hallways stretched on like they had no end. Claire Bennett moved through them with her usual timid grace. At 29, she was a nurse who preferred the shadows to the spotlight. Her warm brown eyes hid behind thick glasses, and her once blonde hair was now dyed a muted chestnut to avoid attention. She wore simple navy scrubs, her badge clipped neatly to her chest, though the weight she carried was far heavier than that plastic tag. For years, Claire had been drowning in medical debt, fighting to keep her mother alive after a diagnosis that had turned their world upside down. Every paycheck went to hospital bills, every spare moment to worry, but tonight was different. She'd been asked to deliver an urgent report to the new CEO's office on the 20th floor. A simple task, yet it twisted her stomach in knots. Claire avoided people in power. Their sharp words and commanding presence always reminded her of a past she'd tried desperately to bury. The elevator chimed at every stop, each ding tightening the knot in Claire's stomach. She clutched the manila folder in her hand. Inside was a report detailing patient outcomes for the quarter. Vital data the new CEO needed before tomorrow's board meeting. Why they chose her, she didn't know. Maybe because she always stayed late, quietly dedicated, unnoticed. Until tonight. When the elevator doors slid open, the 20th floor greeted her like another world. Polished wood walls, soft amber lighting, and a spotless reception desk. Completely empty. The air held a subtle blend of leather and expensive cologne, so different from the antiseptic sting of the wards below. Claire stepped cautiously toward a door bearing a brass nameplate. Ethan Carter, Chief Executive Officer. Her sneakers squeaked gently on the marble. She paused, raised her hand, and knocked. Once, then twice. Soft and uncertain. No answer. Instead, she heard it, faint but clear, the sound of running water. She tilted her head. Maybe someone left a faucet on? Her nurse's instinct stirred. She couldn't just leave the report. With a nervous breath, she turned the handle and stepped in. The office was dim, lit only by a desk lamp. A laptop sat closed beside neatly stacked papers, but the sound of water grew louder. Her gaze landed on a side door, cracked open, steam curling through the gap. Claire stepped closer. "Hello?" she called softly. No reply. She pushed the door open. Inside, a man stood under the shower in a sleek glass stall. Water poured down broad shoulders and slick dark hair. His eyes were closed, lost in the heat. Tall, solid, unaware of her presence. Claire froze. Her face flushed. She stumbled back in shock, hands shaking, dropping the floor. It hit the floor, papers scattering. The noise made him snap awake. He turned sharply, their eyes locked, his confused, hers horrified. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice deep, grabbing a towel. Claire couldn't speak. Her legs moved before her mind did. She turned and ran. The door slammed behind her. Inside, Ethan wrapped the towel around his waist and stepped out. Water dripped from his skin as he scanned the floor and spotted the folder. He picked it up, eyes catching the name scribbled on the top page. Claire Bennett. His brow furrowed. That name. It tugged at something buried deep. Claire raced down the stairwell as if shame alone could set her on fire. Her heart pounded painfully, hands trembling, breath uneven. She had just seen Ethan Carter, the hospital's new CEO, the one man she never thought she'd lay eyes on again. And worse, she'd seen him in a moment no one would ever want to remember. But beyond the embarrassment was something deeper, a shock that rattled her core, a truth she'd buried for 6 long years. Back then, Ethan had been a medical student, brilliant, passionate, full of dreams to change the world. Claire was just a nursing student, but she'd fallen in love with him completely. They shared dreams, laughter, plans for a future that felt unbreakable. Then came Margot Carter, his mother. Powerful, cold, wealthy. She came to Claire with a check and a threat. Leave Ethan, or destroy everything he was working for. Claire walked away not for the money, but because she believed staying would cost him his future. She disappeared without a word. No note, no call. She was already carrying his child but told no one. She gave birth alone, raised their daughter alone, chose silence even when it hurt the most. And Ethan? He vanished too. No search, no question, just gone. But in that instant, when their eyes met through the steam and silence, Claire knew it was him. His hair was different, his frame stronger, but those eyes, those same deep brown eyes pulled her back in time. The past hadn't stayed buried. It had returned, staring right at her. Ethan sat in his dim office, the desk lamp casting his reflection across the polished wood. On the table lay the report Claire had dropped, her name hastily scribbled on the first page. Claire Bennett. That name stirred something in him, but the memory wasn't clear. The woman with thick glasses, dark brown hair, and evasive eyes didn't look like the girl he once loved. The Claire he knew back then had soft blonde hair, a smile that lit up every room, and eyes filled with trust. The Claire he'd seen recently was withdrawn, guarded, almost cold. He told himself it must be a coincidence. But then one detail changed everything. A few days later, while passing the staff locker room, Ethan noticed a photo slip out from a half-open locker. He bent down to pick it up, a woman and a little girl, both smiling brightly. The woman was Claire. The child had deep brown eyes and curly dark hair, so much like his own when he was a boy. A wave of confusion washed over Ethan. His chest tightened, not just because of the child, but because of Claire's face in the photo. She didn't look like the distant nurse he'd met these past few days. She looked like the Claire he had once known. That smile, those eyes, just dulled now, clouded by time and pain. He began watching her more closely, quietly asking for information. With each detail, that strange sense of familiarity turned into a slow, burning suspicion. Claire, meanwhile, kept the truth locked away. Maddie, the little girl, was Ethan's daughter, but she had never told him. To protect the secret, she let Ryan Hale, her old college friend, play the role of father. Ryan never asked for reasons. He simply stayed, ready to shield both mother and daughter with his quiet loyalty. In the small kitchen of her apartment, Claire sat staring at an unsigned letter. No return address, no name, just a few handwritten lines. Stay silent. Everything will be taken care of. At the bottom, the now familiar alias, Mr. Raven. It had been 2 years since she'd signed that strange contract, a desperate agreement, a legal marriage on paper with a man she had never met, in exchange for her mother's medical expenses. Every month, the debts were paid, never late. In return, she was to remain absolutely silent, no questions, no contact, no exit. Claire had often wondered who would do such a thing, spend tens of thousands of dollars just to help a stranger. But the money kept coming, her mother kept breathing, and so she forced herself to stop wondering. What she never could have imagined was that the man behind it all was Ethan Carter. Ethan had created the Mr. Raven identity to privately support critical cases the healthcare system failed. He had no idea the recipient, this struggling nurse, was Claire, the woman he once loved and lost. Everything unfolded in shadow. 2 lives once intertwined, now unknowingly connected again through invisible threads. And Claire had no clue that the man she'd just walked in on in the shower was the same man who had been saving her mother's life for 2 years. Fate, it seemed, was quietly stitching their lives back together through forgotten love, hidden truths, and a contract built on silence. Since that unexpected encounter, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Claire. There was something about her that unsettled him. Not just a sense of familiarity, but the sadness in her eyes, something he had once loved deeply. He began assigning her special tasks, not to pressure her, but to be close to her. Claire was cautious, but accepted. Short exchanges, moments working on patient files together. Slowly, the space between them began to shrink. Then came a rainy night. The hospital was quiet. Maddie had a high fever and was taken to the pediatric unit. Claire stayed by her daughter's bed for hours, never leaving. Ethan walked by and saw her slumped beside Maddie, her eyes red from crying. He stepped in silently and sat next to her. They were no longer CEO and nurse, just two exhausted people clinging to fragile hope. That night, in a small on-call room, they came back together. No promises, no plans. Just pain, memories, and feelings that had never truly faded. A few weeks later, Claire found out she was pregnant. She froze, not from fear, but from hope. The doctor had once said Maddie could only survive with a sibling as a donor, and this new life inside her might be Maddie's only chance. Claire kept it to herself. She wasn't ready to tell Ethan, but Vanessa Langford, his fiancée, she was the heiress to an old money family, well matched with Ethan at charity galas and boardroom headlines. To the world, they were a power couple in the private healthcare elite, but Vanessa wasn't naive. She saw the shift in him. His eyes drifted too often, specifically toward a soft-spoken nurse named Claire Bennett. Vanessa had long sensed something had changed. She hired a private investigator to follow Claire. When she discovered Claire had purchased prenatal vitamins, her jealousy turned into fury. She hired a nurse, drowning in debt, exchanging cash for crime. A dose of abortive drugs was slipped into Claire's water during a night shift. Claire drank it, unaware. Hours later, she collapsed. Blood stained her scrubs. When she woke up, the doctor only said one sentence: "You lost the baby?" Claire's scream echoed through the hospital hallways, a sound that tore through the air and froze everyone who heard it. But it didn't end there. A few days later, Ethan's mother, Margot Carter, died suddenly after taking her heart medication. The pills were found to be counterfeit. A bottle bearing Claire's fingerprints was accidentally discovered in Ethan's office. His pain twisted into doubt. He didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was too clear. In desperation, he took Claire to a private house on the outskirts, not to imprison her, but to protect her from the investigation growing like a tidal wave. But Claire saw it differently. To her, it was betrayal. Claire sat in the secluded house on the city's edge, the one Ethan had brought her to after the miscarriage and Margot's death. Her phone had died the night before. She hadn't spoken to anyone. She still believed Ethan no longer trusted her, that he'd chosen to believe the fabricated evidence. She had no idea that danger was creeping closer than ever. Elsewhere in the city, Martin Bennett, the father Claire had spent her life resenting, sat drinking cheap whiskey beside his daughter from another marriage, Tessa. Years ago, he abandoned Claire and her mother in pursuit of a richer life. Now, with word that Claire was linked to a powerful CEO, he smelled opportunity. "That girl is our ticket out of this dump," Martin growled, eyes bloodshot. Hours later, while Claire was absent from the hospital, Tessa showed up at the pediatric ward with a syrupy smile. "Want to visit Grandma, sweetheart? Come with Auntie." Maddie nodded innocently. And just like that, she vanished. Ryan was the first to notice. He had come to drop off toys for Maddie, only to find her bed empty. He checked with nurses, reviewed security footage, and froze when he saw Tessa leading Maddie out. He raced to Ethan's house, pounding on the door. "They've taken Maddie," he shouted. Ethan opened the door, his face draining of color. "Tess and Martin, they've got her." Claire rushed out from the room, pale and breathless. "What?" Ryan explained everything. Ethan called his private security team immediately. They traced Martin's phone signal to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts. Inside, Maddie shivered in the dark. Martin paced, phone in hand. 10 million, he growled into the voicemail to Ethan, or the kid disappears. Back at the house, Ethan turned to Claire, voice tight. "Maddie, she's my daughter." "Isn't she?" Claire froze, her heart stopped. Ryan stepped forward. His voice was calm but cutting. "Yes, she's yours. Claire never told you because your mother forced her to leave. She was scared she'd lose Maddie too." Ethan staggered. The truth hit like a wave. Claire, the woman he once loved, once lost, was standing in front of him again, with the child they'd once created. But there was no time for grief. Maddie was in danger, and they had to bring her home. The rescue began that very night. Ethan's security team followed the signal to an old warehouse outside Chicago. Rain poured down in sheets, and darkness cloaked the building. Flashlights cut through the shadows, boots echoed on wet concrete, and tension filled the air. Inside, Martin paced with a bottle in one hand and his phone in the other, checking the time every few seconds. Tessa sat close to Maddie, her eyes cold, arms crossed, watching the little girl tremble in the corner. "Her father's gonna pay," Martin muttered, taking another swig. They didn't have time to react. The warehouse doors slammed open, flashlights beamed, footsteps thundered. The security team stormed in. Martin swung a metal pipe but was taken down in seconds. Tessa screamed, tried to pull Maddie away, but was restrained. Claire ran in, her eyes scanning until they locked onto one thing. "Maddie!" "Mommy!" Maddie burst into tears and sprinted into her arms. Claire held her daughter so tightly it hurt. The world went quiet. There was only Maddie, safe, breathing, warm. Ethan stood frozen, watching. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. He knelt beside them, eyes locked on the little girl he now knew was his. He reached out, hesitant. "Hi, sweetheart." Maddie looked at him, then turned to Claire. Claire gave a gentle nod. Maddie touched his hand. "Who are you?" The word was barely a whisper, but enough to break him. Days later, a confession came in from the nurse. She admitted to poisoning Claire's drink under Vanessa's order. Confronted with irrefutable proof, Vanessa couldn't deny it any longer. Ethan personally handed over the evidence to the authorities. Statements, texts, footage, bank transfers. Days later, during a full investigation, the nurse revealed next was worse. It was Vanessa Langford who had given her the counterfeit heart medication used on Margot Carter. Tears streaming, the nurse said, "I didn't know she'd die. Vanessa told me it was just a small swap and that I needed the money." Vanessa was arrested, facing 2 charges, intentional abortion and involuntary manslaughter through medical tampering. The media exploded with headlines. At the same time, Martin and Tessa were charged for kidnapping, extortion, and ties to a counterfeit drug ring. Ethan presented additional evidence from his own internal records, collapsing the entire operation. At a press conference, Ethan stood before a crowd of reporters. "We made a mistake believing power made us untouchable. The truth can't stay buried, and justice will be served." From afar, Claire watched, not as a frightened nurse, but as a woman who had survived. He was no longer just a CEO. He was a man brave enough to face what he had once run from. But even then, her heart still bore the scars. Just when it seemed the storm had passed, Maddie fell ill again, this time worse than before. Claire rushed her to the pediatric ward, panic etched across her face. Maddie burned with fever, lips pale, strange bruises blooming across her skin like cruel little flowers. The diagnosis came: HLH syndrome, a rare immune disorder that attacks the body's own systems. Without a stem cell transplant, her chances of survival were close to none. Claire nearly collapsed. She had no living relatives. Maddie had no siblings. The odds were devastating. Designation stood frozen, powerless, until Ryan stepped forward. "I've called every contact I have," Ryan said, holding a wrinkled printout. "A few friends work with the International Marrow Donor Registry." Days later, a miracle arrived. A woman in Boston, who had registered years ago as a donor, was a perfect match for Maddie. She agreed to fly to Chicago as soon as she heard. The day of surgery was painfully quiet. Claire sat outside the OR, hands clenched, eyes fixed on the sealed doors. Ethan sat beside her, his hand resting over hers. They said nothing, but his warmth steadied her. Hours passed like years. Finally, the doctor emerged, pulled down his mask, and nodded. "She's going to be okay." Claire broke down, shoulders shaking as tears spilled freely. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, no longer holding back. Inside, Maddie lay beneath a white blanket, her tiny hand resting on her chest, her face calm as an angel. A second chance had been given, carved out of love, sacrifice, and the quiet resilience of people who had already lost too much. Ryan stood just outside the hospital room, watching through the glass as Claire and Ethan leaned over Maddie's bed, their hands intertwined. He smiled, not out of bitterness, but something gentler. Resignation. Relief. He had always known this day might come. known that the bond between Claire and Ethan ran deeper than time or silence could erase. Still, it didn't make walking away any easier. He turned, pulling his coat tighter around him as he stepped into the evening air. No one stopped him. He didn't expect them to. Sometimes love meant staying, and sometimes it meant letting go. Ryan Hale had done both. Maddie healed, little by little. The bruises faded, her smile returned. She sat in her hospital bed, coloring carefully, occasionally looking up to ask Claire, "Where's Daddy?" Ethan was always on time. Every morning he arrived with pancakes, orange juice, and a soft smile for the daughter he never knew he had. Until now. When Maddie was finally discharged, Ethan brought Claire and her home to a quiet house just outside the city. It was the same home he had secretly purchased years ago under the name Mr. Raven, hoping one day it might shelter them. Now, it was no longer a silent dream. It was theirs. Claire returned to work at the hospital, still a nurse, but no longer walking with her head down. Her steps were lighter, her eyes brighter. She had a home waiting for her now. Ethan scaled back his hours at Carter Health Group. He learned to cook, played chess with Maddie. Sometimes, he tucked white daisies under Claire's pillow, just to make her laugh. One soft spring evening, Claire stepped out onto the porch holding a pregnancy test. Positive. She didn't cry, but when Ethan stepped outside and met her gaze, they didn't need words. He pulled her into his arms. She whispered, "This time, we'll get it right." Months later, a baby boy was born. They named him Eli, a name that meant light after darkness. Maddie held him gently and whispered, "My little brother." On the porch, bathed in golden light, the family sat, three hearts stitched back together by fate, forgiveness, and love. The sky stretched endlessly above them. No more running, no more hiding, just home. And that was enough.